last year, we saw a lot of companies laying off their workforce, especially in the US, very big tech companies laying off tens of thousands of workers. And what they weren't really aware of is the impact generative AI would have on their organization. Today, we're realizing that those companies have cut into the muscle of their company in a way that, I mean, to give you an example, one company let go of 20,000 employees. Today, they have 80,000 open requisitions, open headcount. Like, it's unfortunate and very frustrating to watch because I'm trying to educate these organizations to say, no, the people you need are actually the people you have right now. So that's usually the first thing that I encourage organizations to think about. Like, yes, of course, you probably need to open new headcount and get new talent. But I would be surprised if you didn't already have people in your organization that cared about this technology, were interested in learning the technology, and would be champions in the organization for teaching others this technology. I remember being, at my previous company, I was just starting a generative AI practice. And I just went to my internal company and said, who wants to learn this? And 75 people raised their hand. Now, only 40 of them were serious when I started assigning homework, but 40 of them did it in their own spare time, out of their own excitement. And I think that most companies have within their organization people who could help them deliver huge value when it comes to AI if you're willing to look internally, educate them, and invest in them to grow this skill set. You'll be doing the same thing if you hire externally. The only difference is they already know you and like you and trust you. So why wouldn't you use your own employees to really drive this type of innovation? I did about 30 projects in Gen AI last year. And in all of those projects, it started with this boardroom to whiteboard to keyboard concept. And so I'm in the boardroom, and the board or C-level executives always ask me the same three questions. The first question was, how do I make sure I don't hurt anybody with this stuff? The second question was like, where should I even start? But the third question, without fail, was, what about my workforce? How do I bring them along? And actually, what ended up happening is we want to harness the enthusiasm. Almost everyone knows what generative AI is. Even if they're not talking about it at work, even if you tell them at work not to use it, they're at home. I mean, my mom texted me that someone on Facebook was talking to her about generative AI. And I tried to educate her that, hey, I do that. But it's interesting now, like, it is completely accessible. So I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding that you already have this enthusiasm. How do you harness that inside your organization? So upskilling a workforce, it's critical. As a matter of fact, it's the only way we're going to be able to reduce that skills gap. I mean, I got into tech during Y2K. And Y2K was, I always say, the first time the world was going to end. But we had the same skills problem. We didn't have enough people who knew how to code. But here's what they ended up doing. They found people with aptitude, passion, and enthusiasm, and then they taught those people to code. And AI is the same. You're going to want to find people with the right attitude, with not a fixed mindset, an open mindset. That you're going to want to find people that are passionate about building and learning, and then teach them the skills. The skills are human language skills, right? We're not asking them to become data scientists. We're asking them to become applied scientists, and that's a very different thing. I think one of the challenges is often that we want to build systems to help, and we don't include those people. Very similar to the concept of, building something for someone without someone's input. So many times we're asking, we're coming in as a technology team, and I remember building a system to help with HR. So we'd give them reminders about performance reviews happening, and we'd build a chatbot, a generative AI chatbot to help them. And one of our core principles in doing this was to be, nudging, not nagging, right? Because it's very easy to become this nagging system, which is what we used to have. Like, that was the old chatbot. Now we want it to be super helpful. So we'd be contextual. We would say, hey, we noticed you've not taken a mental health day, or your culture days are still available. Make sure you take those, where we're nudging people along to make good decisions about investments they've already made in an organization. And I think a lot of companies could just look at, how do we help our employees do better? And it might not be, how do we help them do a task? It actually might be helping them leverage benefits we've given them, giving them, a mindfulness, just nudge to say, hey, take some time for yourself, get up, take a walk, right? How do we reward them for this behavior? I think one of the best examples I saw was around these contact centers that we were helping evolve. And before it was very hard to do this, but with generative AI, we were able to look at what they were doing in the immediate moment and generate a learning path that was very contextual to exactly what happened on those calls. And then in that learning path, rather than, it's like carrot versus stick, right? Rather than punishing them for all the things they did wrong, we'd give them a learning path. And if they chose to make themselves better and take those learning activities, we'd reward them, give them a Starbucks gift card, or just celebrate them to the rest of the organization. People get rewarded and like being rewarded in different ways. Well, generative AI allows you to hyper personalize your reward systems in your company. So it's important to think like this is reinvention all over, employee experience, employee task management. Like, how do you get people to do more of what they love and release them from doing things that steal their joy? And I think it's really a moment of prosperity for most companies if they tap into this technology successfully. One of the things that I've been a part of is creating virtual academies. There's a company called TouchCast. They were at the Computer Electronics Show this year. And one of the things that they were focused on was building content that was, again, hyper personalized, right, for someone. So imagine if you are walking into like a sales room and let's say you're at the Apple store and you walk instead of to a human, you go to a persona, like a kiosk. But now, when you walk into the Apple store sees you, sees what you're wearing, and they create a avatar that looks a little bit like you, that's Hispanic, that wears a graphic tee, has a blazer on. Not the same, not creepy, but just enough for you to be like, oh, you look very nice. You look like me. And then you have this conversation and it molds to it's mirroring who you are and how you ask questions. If you speak Spanish, it speaks Spanish. If you speak, like I'm from Miami, if you speak Spanglish, which is this weird combo of Spanish and English, like it will mold to who you are. And what we found is when you do that, people are much more receptive. So imagine if I come up and in my profile, it says, I like podcasts. And whenever I get this in context learning, instead of it showing me some learning module that most of us don't like doing, it instead says, hey, listen to this podcast. And it's education via podcast style that's dynamically generated with Gen AI. Like it literally gets created right there in real time when the experience happens that I need training on. So now we're not looking at like, how do we get everyone to do their ethics training at the end of the year or like all these required, development activities that we're asking them for. We instead become very personalized, find out how they want to learn. Maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's a webinar, maybe it's our CEO has a deep fake of themselves that does the teaching, like whatever makes me as an employee happier and more productive and more willing to accept the teaching. Most of the time, the block to building these systems is how long it takes to create this content. So now we can amplify those content creation activities. And I think that way more people get what they need when they need it. I recently was working with a petrol company, and it was very interesting because in presenting to them the different opportunities around education, they were desperate to say, okay, we just need everyone to understand this space. So there was this kind of 101 level of education that was required. I think what we found over time, working with this petrol organization and others, building our generative AI university, if you will, was that people needed a high energy person. Like I'm often that person, maybe you could guess why, but I'm often that person because they didn't want like a AI avatar. They didn't want kind of a canned speech. They wanted someone who would inspire people. And so I think the idea of having influencers and I don't mean like YouTube influencers, but internal organizational influencers or even someone external who is empathetic to the employee to help them. It's really much more of a coaching activity. So to be aware that your investment, yes, is going to be in some training, but it's ultimately going to be in this kind of coaching process to constantly provide accountability and excitement around growing their skills. Because these skills are continuously evolving. New tools are coming out all the time. How do we keep people from kind of getting resistant to this change? A lot of that has to do with the energy and positivity that's placed around the activities themselves.